Hello, hello, Dr. Angie. Thank you so much for hopping on.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here.
I am literally so excited to ask you a million questions. I'll have to talk super fast to get through maybe even half of them. But you guys, I'm really excited. Today, I am talking to Dr. Angie of Core Recovery PT. She has literally changed my life. She is a pelvic floor specialist who helps women prepare for labor, prevent injury, restore their core, their pelvic strength, postpartum, all those things. But without obsessing over Kegels or kind of like guessing their way back into fitness. She has an incredible, proven, tried and true method. So Dr. Angie, thank you again. I cannot wait to ask you all these questions. I'm like
Oh,
totally jumping at it.
absolutely. Yeah, happy to be here and just share the word.
Yeah. You guys, first, I do have to share just like a personal testimony. I tell all my friends about Dr. Angie at this point. Her approach has absolutely changed my life. This is my short little uh, testimony that I just have to share. You guys, like my background is I ran Division I track. I've now had two babies. So over the course of that time, I have personally been in contact with a lot of professional coaches, a lot of physical therapists, a lot of pelvic floor physical therapists. And her approach is just so one of a kind that even throughout all of that, I still had issues from an early age. And this is the first time in my life I am able to run and not have leaking issues and also having other symptoms alleviated just because she knows how to look at your whole body. And I'm just so grateful for that, Dr. Angie. Like, I don't know if you realize how much well, of course you do because you love what you do, but you really have totally changed my life and obviously countless others. So I want to ask you first, because I know that this is a very like heartfelt passion of yours. Can you give us a little bit of the backstory for what initially got you started on this track and specifically like the breathwork piece? I would really love to hear like that backstory that got you interested in the first place.
Okay. Yeah. So in PT school, I was always interested in women's health. And I had some really phenomenal mentors. I saw a lot of female athletes coming out of PT school. And, you know, most of them actually, they were in phenomenal shape, but most of them had stress incontinence with running.
Mm,
I lived up in Fort Collins at the time. There was lots of marathon runners and triathletes and, people who would do those like 100-mile runs in the mountains. And it really started to make me look at the female body differently. It's like, why are all of these athletes, suffering from pelvic floor dysfunction and
totally.
leaking? So that's what led me down the path to do my doctoral thesis in women's health and pelvic floor function. And really, honestly, I, spent lots of time and energy and money getting a doctoral level education and practicing that for years after school, all to learn that what I learned in PT school was actually not all that helpful.
Mm,
So these women were reliant on my manual therapy, internal pelvic floor release. I'm teaching them Kegels, doing biofeedback, hooking them up, to the E-stem. And we're going through all sorts of complicated Kegel exercises, and really nobody's getting better. So that's what made me start searching for something else. Like I knew that true healing was possible. And true healing to me is like you're independent. Like
mm.
you don't need sessions. Of course, we do a lot of sessions that are, um, you know, pro, uh, sorry, um,
Like preparatory and things like that, or
right for maintenance.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like training weekly and stuff like that. That's super helpful. But ultimately, you want to have a program that you can implement on your own.
Right.
And so that led me down the whole research path of looking into, what really causes pelvic floor dysfunction. And actually, where I landed first was more organ position. So I at that time I was working in the urogynecology department at Kaiser, and I was working with a surgeon who was a phenomenal surgeon that actually didn't want to do surgery. And so he was trying to find like all the other ways to help women with
Oh,
incontinence, prolapse, you know, sexual dysfunction, all those things. And he was looking for, you know, ways to help them without surgery because he knew, you know, surgery is not 100% and it comes with a
right,
lot of risks.
right,
So there was a nurse practitioner in this practice who practiced Mayan medicine and indigenous medicine. And at the time, I, you know, thought she was a little woo woo kind of out there.
right.
But she introduced me to the importance of the position of the uterus through Maya medicine. And I ended up really going deeply into that with her and studying in Belize with her and a
Wow.
naturopath doctor for several months. And when I brought that protocol back to my practice at Kaiser, that was phenomenal. So teaching women how to position their uterus. But then I realized that, you know, just the abdominal massage and just the manual therapy wasn't enough. And so that's when
Hmm.
I really started looking for more of like an active exercise-based approach for uterine positioning.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's when I found hypopressive training. And then I went and studied in Spain for several months with Tamara Rial. And so she was another one of my mentors. Um, so I have to give credit, you know, to all of the phenomenal people that have taught me, you know, what I know. And yeah, it really just came from a continual curiosity and search to find something that actually works, that actually
Hmm.
helps women with pelvic floor dysfunction.
That's beautiful. I think it's the best kept secret for all female athletes and all moms. Like, I am just ready to shout it from the rooftops. Can you maybe take us to just like the basics of, because I'm going to be honest, before I got pregnant, I didn't even know what the pelvic floor was. I had never heard of that before. Can you just like briefly explain like what makes up the pelvic floor and what would make it function optimally?
Yeah, so the pelvic floor is a layer of muscle at the base of your pelvis, and it's sort of shaped like a hammock. You know, the pelvis is shaped like a bowl, and the pelvic floor is shaped like a hammock inside of that. In females, we have 3 openings. In males, there's 2, and the pelvic floor can move up into more of an umbrella shape. It can be more of like a dinner plate shape, or it can move down into a hammock shape. The pelvic floor is unique from other muscles in that it is actually 70% fascia. So a lot of people think
Wow.
like, oh, the pelvic floor muscle, like it's all muscle down there. No, it's actually 70% fascia. Okay.
Wow.
In addition to that, the other thing that makes the pelvic floor very unique is that it's compromised of 80% involuntary muscle fibers. So every skeletal muscle in your body has both involuntary and voluntary muscle fibers. So the muscles of the limbs, the arms and the legs are 90% voluntary, 10% involuntary. So those muscles respond really well to sets and reps, and I'm going to think about, you know, my bicep as I do 10 reps. But the core, everything except for the arms and legs, and specifically the pelvic floor, is 80% involuntary muscle fibers. So
Mm.
we are talking about a structure that is only 30% muscle. And of that 30% muscle, you only have control over 20% of those muscle fibers. So, such a small
Wow.
fraction of the pelvic floor we actually have conscious control over. So, when you
And
do a
that's
Kegel,
I was
yep,
just gonna say, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's what you're controlling when you're doing a Kegel, which is, like,
yeah,
such a small percentage.
which is barely any of it.
Oh, so
Right.
interesting. Okay.
Exactly. So when you think like do a Kegel or let's take the abdominal muscles for an example, like draw your belly button to your spine, right? You're only accessing 20% of those muscle fibers. And then when we're
Wow.
talking about the pelvic floor, that's 20% of 30%. So a very small amount. And that is, you know, physiologically, anatomically why Kegels don't work. And in
Wow.
fact, they make things a lot worse because that's not
Wow.
how the pelvic floor activates. It does not activate under conscious control. You're not in control of your leaking, you know? You're not in
Wow.
control. You shouldn't have to think about, what your pelvic floor is doing all day long. So
Right.
that's why a conscious exercise cannot, heal an unconscious problem.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting. Well, so then what is going on anatomically when someone leaks?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of leaking. There's two different types of leaking in general. There's stress incontinence and urge incontinence. Let's start with stress incontinence. That's kind of the most common for female athletes. So that's the type of incontinence that you get if you laugh, jump, sneeze, when you run or exercise. So this is a mechanical problem. So it has to do with how your pelvic floor and your diaphragm manage pressure in your abdomen. So when you when the pressure increases in the abdomen, so when you cough, laugh, sneeze, lift your kids, run, jump, the pressure increases. When the pressure increases, the pelvic floor and the diaphragm and the abdominal muscles should move in a very specific direction reflexively, automatically without you thinking about it. But when there's core muscle dysfunction, and the pressure increases in the abdomen, that pressure is not able to be absorbed by the muscles. They should absorb that pressure sort of like a trampoline. It's accepted and then it
Wow.
rebounds back
That's a good image.
um to its, resting position. So in the case of stress incontinence, those muscles are not absorbing the increase in intra-abdominal pressure. And so that pressure, that load, that force is going through the organs and the
Mm,
internal connective tissue. And so that's what leads to stress incontinence or leaking with exertion or exercise.
wow. That is
Um,
so cool.
yeah.
Like, my mind is
um,
blown.
the other kind of leaking that's common is called urge incontinence. And so this is the leaking that you get when you have urgency on the way to the bathroom. Um, this is more of a problem with the bladder muscle itself. The bladder muscle is called the detrusor muscle, and that is 100% involuntary muscle fibers, but it's a muscle nonetheless. And we can access those involuntary muscle fibers through eliciting reflexes in the nervous system. So, in the case of urge incontinence, a lot of times that's related to irritation of the bladder muscle itself, coupled with core muscle dysfunction.
Super interesting. Why do so many women what does, pregnancy and birth have to do with this? Because it's almost like a joke where every mom is like, "Oh, yeah, I can't go jump on the trampoline anymore." Like, "Oh, I sneezed." And I kinda grew up thinking like it was so normalized that it was almost
Mhm.
inevitable. But
Yeah.
what is it that happens during pregnancy specifically and birth that tips a lot of women into the category of struggling with this?
Yeah. So during pregnancy, I mean, this is the ultimate challenge for your pelvic floor and your core. Um, Pregnancy is a exponentially increasing pressure in your abdomen as the baby grows. So over the course of 10 months, the pressure continually increases in the abdomen. And so your core muscles, and when I say core muscles, I mean everything except for your arms and legs. That's your core. But specifically, pelvic floor and abs really have to get increasingly stronger the more pregnant you get.
Mm.
And so, if your core muscles do not increase their strength and adapt to that increase in pressure, then leaking is often the result. And the other thing that causes that leaking, besides core muscle dysfunction, is low organs. So, of course, your growing uterus, sitting on top of your bladder causes a lot of pressure. And those low organs compresses the pelvic floor and reduces blood, lymph, and nerve flow to the pelvic floor. And so then those muscles stop functioning as they should. So
Wow.
that's where leaking can happen, like during pregnancy. A lot of times, maybe women don't have a lot of leaking during pregnancy, and it doesn't happen until postpartum, until the delivery. And so, depending on how the delivery went, if there was any sort of pelvic floor injury there, or even if it was a great delivery and there wasn't a lot of pelvic floor injury, the pelvic floor muscles are still getting like a max stretch and then
Mhm.
have to come back to their, you know, uh, they have to shrink back down to a more functional resting tone again. And the speed at which they shrink back down will determine, how bowel and bladder function are impacted, by that
Wow.
healing process. Um, so that's why postpartum rehab and breath work is so key throughout pregnancy and postpartum.
Wow. How long does it realistically take for the pelvic floor to recover after pregnancy and birth? Obviously, that's so unique for each person, but is there an average or anything?
Well, I guess it depends on yeah, it is so unique for each person, but I guess it depends on what your definition of recovery is, you know? Um so ideally, you're not symptomatic postpartum. There are not you're not leaking, there's no pain. Of course, things like feel different, there might be some pressure, but having those symptoms postpartum is not necessarily normal. So,
Okay.
I guess we could answer that question a little bit more in terms of tissue healing times.
Oh,
So, when the pelvic floor muscles and fascia go through such an enormous stretch, typically 4 to 5 weeks, it takes 4 to 5 weeks for the pelvic floor muscles to heal if there was a tear. Okay.
okay.
Or if there was some sort of strain. Fascia, right? 70% fascia. Fascia, white connective tissue, takes closer to 12 weeks to heal. So if
Wow.
you had an episiotomy, if you tore, we're talking closer to 12 weeks. C-section. Um, and then if there was prolonged, if the second stage of labor, which is the pushing stage, if that was a lot longer, um, I kind of gauge it at like over 30 minutes to an hour, then we're talking, okay, there's um some pretty serious impact on the pelvic floor there.
Right.
Um, that's going to extend those healing times. So that's where I get a little bit frustrated when, we have like, oh, I went to my 6 week, that's like the 6 week post op, post delivery
Right.
appointment. And my OB said I'm okay because it's 6 weeks. It's like just based on this, like, this number that really has nothing to do with the actual tissue healing time, even.
Oh, it's
So,
way too early. Yeah.
yes, way too early.
I have a lot of questions about recovery now, and like my mind is buzzing, but I have to ask, can you break down like what does the pelvic floor actually do during both a vaginal birth and a C-section? Obviously, again, it varies, but like what is happening? I mean, I honestly, I have no idea. I do remember during my first birth with my oldest, it was a very straightforward birth, and I do remember just feeling kind of like what you described, this hammock right
Hmm.
before I knew I was about to like had to push. I
Hmm.
remember feeling it just like shaking. And I was standing up and I just felt intuitively, I was like, whoa, this muscle is like really working hard. That was like the first time in my life I had ever even cognitively been super aware of
Hmm.
that even being a muscle, but I felt it really working to, ebb and flow with the pressure of this baby wanting to come out and opening. And it blew my mind. But what is
Yeah.
actually happening during that time? And obviously, it's so different for a
Mhm.
C-section, but there are so many different layers there that are being a part of this surgery. I'm just so curious about both of those.
Yeah, okay, so yeah. So what does
Sorry,
the
huge
pelvic floor
question.
It's okay. I'm gonna break it down a little bit. So what does the pelvic floor do during a vaginal delivery? Um,
Yes.
well, labor, the first stage of labor, when you're not pushing yet, that is like the preparation for the pelvic floor.
Okay.
And it's so different for each birth, depending on, the individual conditions, during that labor and delivery. But during the first stage of labor, when you're not pushing, that's when your uterus is starting to rhythmically contract and move, like literally move down. And we've got a lot of hormones going on that is loosening up the white connective tissue in our body, right? And so it's preparing, the pelvis is starting to open, and then the pelvic floor, 70% fascia, is starting to relax. That fascia is starting to, kind of like open up. Now, the actual pelvic floor is not opening yet until the baby's head starts to hit it, you know? But prior to that, it's like the uterus is preparing everything, okay? Muscularly, I think this is a little bit of a misconception. Muscularly, a lot of first-time moms at least ask me like, how do I push? They think there's this like, very specific, maybe complex, like pushing muscular strategy where they're like, I'm gonna hold this muscle and it's not like that at all. It's all reflexive. And
Hmm.
what's really happening is the uterus is contracting. So we want the uterus to push your baby out ultimately.
Wow.
And your diaphragm too. And and pushing actually is reflexive. And so a lot of women don't get to this point, but many women still do. Um, Especially if it's a natural birth, you'll get to the point where you actually have an urge to
Hmm.
push. And
Hmm.
when you get that urge, it's like it's undeniable. It's like an urge, like I have to throw up. Like I can't help it. You have
Right.
to push. There's nothing else you can do. And so when you start to push, the uterus is contracting as the diaphragm is moving down, as the pelvic floor is moving down, and then all of this pressure up here from the uterus and baby is now coming, out of the cervix. And then the pelvic floor, starts to open. And I can show you my pelvic floor model here. This might help. So during birth, the pelvic floor here, like the vaginal opening, literally opens this far. Like the entire pelvic floor
So mind blowing.
opens up completely.
Right.
And so those muscles, if you've trained them reflexively through breath work throughout your pregnancy, they are primed and ready to do that. They are super connected to your subconscious nervous system. They're like, "Okay, diaphragm, whatever you say, I'm your mirror." And they just open right up, and then they rebound nicely, and then
Mm.
they actually like come back together. Especially if you do some breath work and your diaphragm is encouraging them and guiding them, your pelvic floor muscles, back to, their normal position. And,
So
and
cool.
that's part of why it's so important for the pelvic floor to be fascia so that you can have a baby, because fascia is actually very elastic and changeable.
Super
Um,
interesting. What
and
about
then so
for a C-section?
Yeah, so a C-section, um, again, that kind of depends. So is it an emergency C-section? Is that mom pushing for a little while and then goes to C-section? Or is it a planned C-section? And so that's going to change what happened to the pelvic floor during birth. If it's a planned C-section, well, the pelvic floor got the input of 10 months of pressure Okay. And so that in itself, if you don't have a healthy pelvic floor, can cause pelvic floor dysfunction afterwards. That in
Okay.
itself. You don't even need a vaginal delivery. Um, if you were pushing for a while and then went to an emergency C-section, then there can be some pelvic floor muscle strain, but it makes pelvic floor healing not impossible, not, I don't even want to say harder, but just a little bit more complex because now we've cut the abdominal muscles, and the pelvic floor and the abdominal muscles like work so closely together
Right.
to manage intra-abdominal pressure.
Right.
So if you have a pelvic floor that just went through 10 months of being loaded by pregnancy, and then maybe or maybe not, she was pushed on for a while during delivery, and now she's recovering, but her best friend, the abdominal muscles, who helps her do everything, is now healing from a surgical incision. You got to be careful. You just
Right.
have a different healing timeline with it. And to that point, one kind of interesting thing that like I learned, my doctoral thesis was on the effect of pregnancy and delivery on the pelvic floor muscles. So I used like MRI to look at the physiology of the pelvic floor muscles in women who did not deliver, who've never had a baby, women who have had a vaginal delivery. So it was just one delivery. Women who've had one vaginal delivery, or women who've had one cesarean delivery. And my
Wow.
hypothesis is the women with vaginal delivery are going to have the most pelvic floor dysfunction. And we can measure that by actually fatty infiltration into the pelvic floor muscle. So when a muscle is injured and it actually fat replaces muscle tissue. And you can see that in an MRI because it's like water content.
Wow.
So you can see that in contrast. So my hypothesis is vaginal delivery is going to lead to most pelvic floor dysfunction. That's not true. It was
No way.
cesarean delivery,
Oh,
actually,
wow.
led to most
Because of
pelvic
that,
floor
like,
dysfunction.
disconnect in communication between the
Yes,
muscle and the okay, wow.
exactly. And so the system, right? The diaphragm, pelvic floor, and abdominal muscles like really need each other. All of them have to work together to pump, circulation, nerve, lymph flow, get the organs back up. They really have to work together like postpartum. And so when one of them is, cut into, it affects the whole system.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just you have a longer healing timeline for cesarean. And a
Wow.
lot of what I've learned since then, I mean, that was like almost 15 years ago that I did that. I've learned a lot, and you can absolutely have a traumatic birth ending in emergency C-section and heal beautifully. And so by no means does this mean like C-section moms are doomed in any way. I've found even more ways to help with those problems. But it's just an interesting, fact to know.
Oh, yeah.
Because I also have a lot of moms who are like, I don't want to hurt my pelvic floor. I'm gonna have an elective C-section, type of thing. And we kind of go through that. And it's a different, what's right is different for everybody. But C-section does not necessarily prevent pelvic floor dysfunction.
Wow. That is so interesting. It makes me think of, there was a female Olympic athlete who I believe had an elective C-section for that reason, thinking like, "Oh, this is gonna help me return to professional sports,
Right.
faster." But that's I mean, and honestly, once you explained it with, like, these different tissues having to communicate with each other, that makes total
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
Um, do you this applies to just, like, all I guess all leaking issues, not necessarily moms, but, like, do you think that like, why do you think that this is such an issue with so many women? Like, I'm wondering if it's just the fast-paced lives that we lead where we're not really stopping to take a breath. We all kind of breathe really shallowly, and I don't know
Yeah.
if that's a word. We have shallow breathing, and we're pretty much pretty,
Yeah.
like, on the go. We have a very hunched over culture that's pushing those organs down.
Right.
Um, do you have any ideas as to why we're not being, growing up as young women with on maybe a better trajectory to not struggle with this so often?
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, I think it does have a lot to do with our culture, and just there is so much responsibility on women now, um, and so much pressure on women to, bounce back quickly.
Mhm,
So it used to be like women, y- you know, are not necessarily working their whole pregnancy, and we used to live in a community where we had help from like a whole
mhm,
community tribe of people around you.
yeah,
And now it's like we're on our own. And also it's like, okay, and like pay the bills and
right,
also bounce back and look like a supermodel at 6 weeks,
yeah.
and here is all of these Instagram images and all of
I was
these
just thinking
images from like
Instagram.
the media of like, look at me, like I look so perfect postpartum and it's only been 2 weeks. And
Yeah,
it's just so unrealistic, and it's so unhealthy. And it's a comparative external point of focus. That's the
mhm,
problem. And you're absolutely right. It's like way too fast paced. And when we're fast paced, we don't breathe, just like you said. And if we're not breathing, our pelvic floor is absolutely stagnant,
mhm,
you know? And I think our society is also very much like push through, like ignore these signals in your
oh,
body,
definitely.
you know? I think that though, more recently there's a lot of really positive things coming through where a lot of people are talking about the problem of that and are listening, to those signals and slowing down a lot more. So
That is
we'll
good.
get there, hopefully. But
Yes.
yeah.
No, that's definitely good. I was just mostly curious about that. I mean, because it's interesting because when I first started working with you, I wasn't even really aware of what my body was doing, and you kept on saying, like, everything you're saying now, that these really should be intuitive by my body. Like, let's say running, for example. As
Uh-huh.
I've been working with you, running it's gotten easier and easier and easier for me to breathe while I'm running in a way that is kind to my pelvic floor now without thinking about it. When I first started, I really had to think about it because I just didn't have i- uh, that reflex connection yet. But
Yes.
working on it, I've actually been so surprised how quickly my body picks up on it. And it's like, oh, I know how to do that. Like, that's how I was made. Like, I'm gonna do this without you thinking about it. And it's really beautiful. So
Yes.
I've been like pleasantly surprised by just how when you do a little bit of work, our bodies really kind of pick up the slack and just start doing what I guess they're supposed to do. Um,
Yes,
y-
absolutely. I mean, we were made to do this. So, I mean, what I teach is it's built into your nervous system as a reflex. It's not like I'm teaching something new.
mhm.
It's actually you're remembering. Your subconscious
Yes.
nervous system is remembering how you were designed.
Yeah.
And that's where like the true healing comes in.
Yeah. It's so cool. And it's cool to be on the receiving end of like seeing and feeling that progression, I guess. Um,
Yes.
a couple more things on just like recovery, or I guess actually preparation first. What are some of the most important things anybody listening right now who's pregnant?
Mhm.
Like, what can we do during pregnancy to prepare our pelvic floor for labor and delivery, other
Breath work.
than working with you? Of
Yeah.
course.
Breath work is the number one thing you can do during pregnancy to prepare for delivery.
Okay.
Connecting with your breath and having like really good control of your breath, and like, what does that even mean? Well, specifically, slowing down your breathing and pushing the bounds of your lung capacity. So one like very simple thing that you can do is just very slowly inhale through your nose and see how long you can inhale for. Like really slowly. Can I inhale for 4 seconds? Yeah. Could I extend it to 8 seconds? 10? Okay. And then working on your exhale. Like how long can you exhale for? And can you get the all of the air out of your lungs, you know? Um and then also kind of like you said, like with your running, like remembering to breathe during your daily activities, especially, anything that has to do with like exertion, um, physical exertion, but also anything that is like stressful or emotional
Mm.
for you. Like, are you breathing, through that? That's absolutely key. Like our breath is our spirit. That's like we're
Mhm.
bringing in life that's the first thing we do when we come into this world, and that's the last thing we do when we leave. And so to especially during pregnancy and motherhood, like when you're creating life,
Mhm.
to connect in to like the source that gives you life is beyond powerful.
Mhm. Oh, that's beautiful. You know what I love about that is we were just on the topic of social media. Um, there is a lot of buzz on Instagram that's like, do this, do this, do this, and like so many different exercises, and oh my gosh, so many stretches and things to prepare for pregnancy or whatever. But it's so um encouraging, I guess, or doable to think about. Wait a second,
Mhm.
I can make a huge impact by instead of adding 50 million things to my to-do list as a busy pregnant mom, I can make a huge impact on this preparation process
Yeah.
by actually slowing down the reverse and doing this breathing. And something that helped me, you guys, is I would, at the very first start of this, I had a reminder on my phone every single day to do some of the exercises that Dr. Angie teaches, just because at first I was like forgetting and this and that. And, something else you could do is some area where you spend a lot of time, just like put a little sticky note up or something, right? So I am prepping a meal or
Yep.
more every single day in the same spot. And to have a little sticky note there that says, hey, just do like one quick breathing exercise, one quick this, like even just mentally remembering it goes a long way, and eventually you just do it mindlessly and you don't have to remember, and then it becomes reflexive, which is where I am like getting really close to that point right now, and
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for that. But those are some things that helped me. Dr. Angie, what about
Mhm.
something else I was so grateful for postpartum with my second is you really helped me go step by step in my recovery. Honestly, if anything, you really helped me pump the brakes, right? Because there is this like, oh my gosh, 6 weeks, like I should be running a
Yeah.
marathon, right? What does a healthy postpartum recovery look like, in your opinion?
Well, you are like 100% following your instincts.
Mm,
And you are absolutely practicing your breath work all day long, just like you talked about. I love that example that you shared because that is so important. And especially early postpartum, it's like, I mean, let's be real, that is hard, right? Like
yeah,
you're sleep deprived. You are probably like, you don't feel like yourself in your body. You're in this like weird in between stage. If you have another child, you're like, well, how am I going to run after
yeah,
my toddler? It's, that's a tough time. And then also like our hormones are going through a lot. And so emotionally, like, yes, there are times of bliss, but there's also times of like darkness and depression and confusion. And it's
yeah,
it's it's gnarly sometimes.
100%.
And so just like acknowledging the human experience of that, like just that, like, you're not going to be perfect. It's not going to look the same every single day. Yes, it's going to be hard. Don't expect it to be joyful and blissful all the time. Um, and and be flexible and be patient with yourself and like really tune into your instincts. And in order to have like a successful like recovery and rehab routine, just like you said, it absolutely has to be incorporated into your daily activities. We're not gonna, like, let's not expect you to, take 20, 30 minutes out of your day, even 10 of like, I don't have my baby with me. I'm going to do my little structured thing. I mean, great if some moms can do that. Awesome. But, that's like not realistic or sustainable for like a lot of people. And so
Mhm.
being able to come back to this posture and this breathing that heals your pelvic floor and heals your abdominal muscles, and being able to do it while you're breastfeeding, while you're cooking, while you're picking up, while you're, doing whatever you're doing, is absolutely key for that. Um, and so another thing I've kind of added into the protocol is I call them mini sessions. So it's like you just pick your favorite posture and you do, 3 rounds of breath work in it, no matter, what you're doing. You're like, okay, I have 30 seconds while the water is boiling, and you just get it in.
That's really, really helpful. Yeah, I have unfortunately done both extremes, or not extremes, I guess. The first one's extreme. My first postpartum, I fell into the category of like jumping back in too quickly
Uh,
and not paying attention to these foundational principles you're talking about. And I
uh,
ended up kind of paying for it later on, where I was still not able to do certain basic movements and exercises a year postpartum because I just totally ignored what you're talking about right now in the
yeah.
first few months, and I probably caused some injury. Not anymore, but, second time around, I was a good listener. I did what I was told.
Right.
What what are some things that moms should absolutely avoid in the first 6 weeks postpartum, do you think?
Okay, first 6 weeks.
Mhm.
Um, I mean,
Or any timeline, whatever you want, because obviously
okay.
6 weeks is nothing.
Yeah. I talk like 2 years. It's like,
Okay.
let's take 2 years to recover postpartum. Now, this doesn't mean it's gonna take 2 years to, heal pelvic floor dysfunction or get your waistline back or get back to running or whatever you need to do, but your body is healing and changing significantly for 2 years postpartum.
That's
And
wild.
so really important to, like, be aware and in tuned. So we can kind of break it down. Like the first 6 weeks, you want to be really quiet. You know, you're mostly just you and baby. And so it's again kind of what we talked about, breath work, just very, very gentle breath work, in standing, sitting on all fours, those sorts of things. Maybe you're starting to walk a little bit more, but you're not pushing it, and you're listening to your body. Like as soon as you're like, oh, there's that heaviness, or oh, my back's starting to hurt, or I'm really out of breath or something, you stop. Or you leaked, that's a big sign something's happening there. Like that's like my pelvic floor is getting hurt right now. You want to stop that activity. um, then, after 6 weeks, let's say like 6 to 12 weeks, that's when you're sort of starting to like increase your walking distance. You're maybe doing a little bit more exercise. You might introduce like super light resistance training, very, very light. Um, and then, 12 weeks to about a year, you're getting into like more whole body, um, a little bit more structured exercises, longer workouts, like you're exerting yourself more. And really, all of it is based on your symptoms, um, and specifically the cough test, which is the core muscle function
Yep.
test that I use to say, is your core muscles managing intra-abdominal pressure appropriately? And so that's how we really make it individual to the mom. And you can test yourself, and you can see like how your core muscles are supporting your organs. And if it's safe to get back to running, if it's safe to, get back to those more high intensity exercises. And And some moms can get right back into it, and they're healthy, and they practiced, they had like a great workout routine throughout pregnancy, and those first 6 weeks they were super careful, and they didn't push themselves, and those are usually the moms that you're like, whoa, you're you're already doing that, wow, and you're
Right.
fine, cool. um and then but then, there's some moms who it takes a little bit longer, and I would say most.
Right.
It's more like in that, 3, 6, 9 month range, that they're like, okay, now I'm really starting to,
Yep.
feel like back to myself.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. It is so important to not play that comparison game. I feel like personally, I with
mhm,
my second, it was much faster. uh, I
mhm.
was working with you. Obviously, that played a huge role, but and I intentionally took it slow, but it did. It took me months to feel like, okay, I'm turning the corner. But I'm so grateful, um, just for everything that you've done to help me. Like I literally, like I told my husband, I was like, this is the best decision we ever made. And I tell my friends, I'm like, do it because my friend told me to do it, and I don't know where I would be if she had not told me. Dr. Angie, what is the best platform or way to reach out to you to learn more about working with you one on one, your like more self-paced program? Like where do we bring all of our questions about learning more about everything you've talked about to implement in our own healing journeys?
Yeah, specific questions would be best just emailed to me.
Okay.
So that's Angie at corerecoverypt.com.
We'll link
Um,
that.
And then you can look at my website for, a lot more details on the online program. I have a blog on there that gets into lots of different topics. So that's a wealth of information as well.
Yeah. It's a great blog.
Um, I post on Instagram, but my DMs get pretty full. So that's unreliable. So just send
Got
me
it.
an email if you have a specific question for me, or want to work together one on one.
Okay, we will go straight to email. I hope I've swayed a couple people truly, like just because I really am so grateful, Dr. Angie. Like my whole family's watched this journey and so many friends, and it's such a gift to when you've tried so many things that you almost don't want to try another because you're like, what if this fails again? I've tried
Yeah.
so many, and then you finally hit the golden nugget. It is just a gift. I feel like I have so much of my life back. Like running with my boys in the stroller is a dream that I had honestly let go of. Because even though I was a competitive runner, I thought I would never do it again. Um,
Ugh.
and it's just a gift. Putting it on the calendar to take my oldest to a trampoline park for a little date, just the two of us.
Oh, yay!
I never thought I would be able to do it, and those little
That's
memories, those little
cute.
things, like, they are gold to me. I'm, like, running through my neighborhood with the biggest smile on my face, and I'm just so grateful. So,
Yes.
you guys definitely check her out. Her blog is a wealth of information. Her Instagram's a wealth of information, and Dr. Angie, I'm so grateful for your time.
Yes. Oh, thank you. This has been so fun. It's been just such an honor to work with you and be beside you on this journey.
Yeah, well, thank you. You guys reach out.